The Democratic field of 2020 candidates keeps growing, but so far, one of the biggest voices from 2016 has yet to weigh in. Jason Zengerle is a political correspondent for GQ magazine. He spent time with Bernie Sanders and says Vermont's independent senator has some unfinished business ahead of the next presidential election. And Jason joins me now. Jason, really fascinating read. Senator Sanders did not become president in 2016, of course, but he did come out on top in some ways. Many of the people who've already announced campaigns have adopted his ideas. So what does he find appealing about potentially running for president again?
I think that, it's what happened with him in 2016. He ran a very underdog campaign. He went into it there were no expectations. There was very little fanfare. And about, halfway through that campaign, he began to believe that he could be president. And I think that's the kind of thing that can definitely, leave an impact and make a mark on someone. And I think it's only natural that, given the success he had in 2016, even though he didn't win, he managed to, enhance his own stature. He certainly in the last few years has had a great influence on the Democratic Party and moving it towards his positions. I think it's only human that he would right now be thinking, hey, I could be president. And I think that's what he's trying to wrestle with right now, whether he wants to give it another shot, because he certainly has it in his head that he came so close in 2016. Maybe it's worth giving it another shot in 2020.
Well, is it clear that he'd run the same kind of campaign now as he did in 2016?
Well, I think in some ways, he can't run the same campaign, right? I mean, he had the advantage of really flying under the radar as he got going in 2016. Were he to enter this time, he would immediately be the subject of lots of attention and lots of scrutiny. He'd be the subject of a lot of attacks, too. I mean, in 2016, he didn't really he wasn't subjected to that kind of political attack or that kind of scrutiny. I mean, that would not be the case in 2020. He would be facing that. I do think, though, that he would probably try to run a similar campaign in terms of just the way his campaign is staffed, how small his inner circle is. He's bringing back a lot of the same people, and I think that has given some concern to people who are allies of his. I think they realize that if he were to run in 2020, he would have to run a different kind of campaign, and I don't think Sanders has necessarily given any suggestion that he would do it differently, and I think that would be something to watch.
Well, you write that in the run-up to the presidential race, Sanders has been bedeviled by issues of race and gender. Why has he, and could this be an issue for him as the Democratic field of candidates is looking increasingly diverse?
Yeah, I think it'll definitely be an issue for him. I mean, it's just something that I don't think he had ever spent a lot of time thinking about. I mean, he views politics through the prism of class, and that's the way he's viewed things for, 5 decades. I think during the 2016 campaign, that began to change as he became sort of aware of sort of these issues of identity politics. I mean, there was that famous time when Black Lives Matter protesters seized the podium when he was about to speak. I think he tried to start talking about it in a way that was different from how he talked about it in the past, and I think he's still trying to do that. And I think, it depends on what day you catch him. I mean, some days he will speak in a way about gender and about race that's very, very much in tune with kind of the way a lot of other Democrats talk about it these days. But at the same time, you catch him on another day and he kind of goes back to his class-based view of things. And I think he himself is sort of wrestling with how to stay true to kind of his actual identity, his beliefs, and at the same time update these things a little bit in such a way that they would be more in sync with the modern Democratic Party.
I wonder, Jason, do you have any idea at all when he's going to make a decision?
I think he has to do it in the next month or two. I got the sense from talking to his advisors when I started working on this piece back in the late summer that they fully expected him to decide one way or another in November, right after the midterm elections, and then announce December or January. That obviously didn't happen. I think for a little while there, just in talking to people around him, say like a month or so ago, I got the sense that they were thinking he was not going to run. I get the sense now, I think people around him are more confident that he will run. He's doing everything you need to do in order to run. I mean, he's lining up staff. He's going around the country. I mean, he was in South Carolina last week for Martin Luther King Day. I think he's doing everything he needs to do to keep the options open. At the same time, just the fact that he has not pulled the trigger yet, I do think shows that there's some hesitation on his part. And, I think, look, he has a lot to lose if he runs this time. I mean, in 2016, he obviously didn't win the nomination, but in a lot of ways he won. I mean, his campaign manager in 2016 wrote a book that was entitled How We Won. They didn't win. But, if he were to lose in 2020, no one around him is going to write a book about how we won. I mean, he will lose in every way.
Right. All right. Well, we'll continue to keep an eye on it. Jason Zengerle, really fascinating read, as I said. Thanks so much.
Oh, thanks for having me.